Hello, and welcome to Content Strategy Collective Live, the main stage. I've got an amazing guest today with Kevin Indig. We're going to talk about user intent and why topics are the new keyword. Some of our, we always joke around, Kevin and I do, that we say the word user intent more than anyone else in the world. But Kevin, for anyone that doesn't know you, can you give us a little intro and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'm the defender of user intent. In my free time, I'm director of SEO at Shopify. I've been in the SaaS and e-commerce space for a while, former VP of SEO and content at G2. Before that, I ran SEO at Atlassian. And so Jeff and I, MarketMuse and I, we go way back. Been toying ideas and concepts about user intent back and forth for quite a while. And so I'm super excited to be here today.
So let's start the discussion with kind of keywords and data points, flawed keywords, right? So everyone wants to rank for all the topics that relate to their business. They want to get the bonus words, they want to get the ride-alongs, they want to get all the things that we all strive for as keyword research, topic research experts. A lot of times though, it gets distilled down to a search volume metric. Can you walk through why you consider this to be? We consider this to be 5 years, 10 years in the past, but just the basics of why it's so flawed today.
Yeah. I'm a big advocate of being flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we have to say that search volume is a blessing and a curse for the SEO world, right? There are not a lot of platforms that allow you to quantify demand, market demand, to the same degree as an SEO. And that's amazing. In product development or other areas of marketing and technical marketing, you size the market very differently, right? You size the market through reasoning in a lot of cases, or market research. And so again, SEO and search volume has a unique leg up because there's barely something competitive or comparable out there. Now, here's the downside, right? There are many reasons for why search volume has to be taken with a huge grain of salt, or why I sometimes say that it's flawed. And the first reason is that it was made for ads originally, right? Search volume comes from Google Keyword Planner, which is part of Google Ads, formerly Google AdWords. And so the whole idea was to say, hey, let us help you quantify your ad spend, right? Let us help you give an idea of how many people your ads can reach per month. And so the data is very, very transactional. The second problem is that when we compare search volume with the impressions metric in Google Search Console, which is way more accurate, that's the source of truth, we see that it often doesn't align. It's not accurate, right? Search volume is an estimation in some cases. Like, it's a good guess, don't get me wrong, but it's not the exact demand that you can expect. And even when we get search volume from Clickstream, it's still difficult. Clickstream is a bit better than search volume because it actually has real user data, but it can also be very narrow because only certain people would install the browser extensions that then track Clickstream data. So it has limitations as well. Another beef that I have with search volume is that mobile search volume and desktop search volume are not really represented in the number. But at the same time, when you go to your Google Search Console account and you look at impressions and compare mobile and desktop, you'll see vast differences, like huge differences. And I also mentioned that search volume is not available for all keywords out there, right? This is another common trap that I see SEOs fall into, is that they only optimize for keywords with search volumes. But there are many zero search volume keywords out there that get a lot of impressions, a lot of clicks. And then lastly, search volume is averaged over the year, while in reality, some keywords are very, very seasonal. And so again, it's not a metric that we have to kick in the trash can, but we have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think thinking about them as relative metrics is something that more people are getting into. But can you talk about you talk about ads, and you're talking about match, like they're using match types and all those things and averages. How does that influence your general keyword research strategy? So if you're not relying on volume, how do you determine what is guiding your strategy?
Yeah, it's such a good point. Of course, user intent comes into play here, and we'll talk about that in a second. But again, I think the key before that is to not solely rely search volume, but make it one of the metrics that you look at, right? Another thing that I really like, and of course we have to distinguish a little bit by business model. This is very SaaS oriented, but I really value expert opinions, right? When an expert tells me, hey, these are actually really important topics in this world, that has to say something. We shouldn't use search volume as the sword to cut that arm off and then say, no, your opinion doesn't count. There's no search volume, so I don't care about that. There has to be a qualitative factor, right? And I mentioned before that in some areas you would size the market with market research. And I think there's a lot to that as well, right? That has a certain value. So as soon as we can balance search volume out with maybe a qualitative opinion or qualitative research, that becomes very, very valuable. And I also mentioned that there are some platforms that begin to provide something like search volume or something comparable. Pinterest has started a product that's called Pinterest Trends that will give you something like it's more like trends where they do the relative search demand for products, but that's still valuable. And then, of course, Google Trends is out there. There is eBay Explore, which is obviously very e-commerce focused, but eBay gives you some of the demand for products on their platform. And then there's the social side as well, which we shouldn't underestimate. There are tools like Hashtagify, for example, which will give you the relative demand for a hashtag, which I think is interesting. And of course, we have to be careful. Not everybody uses hashtags, so that have limitations. And then there are platforms like Trendly with a double E, Exploding Topics or Glimpse. They aggregate search demand from many different platforms like YouTube and Amazon and Google Trends and a couple of other sources, and they combine that into an aggregate metric. But then there are YouTube as well, and I would even put platforms like Reddit into the mix. Reddit doesn't provide you an actual number, but simply by looking at how busy some subreddits are, you can start to get an understanding for certain topics, right? And so, when we talk about alternatives to search volume, I think enriching search volume with other quantitative sources and some qualitative research is really the way to go. But then, of course, Jeff, something you already hinted at is, is this idea of not just focusing on the search volume of a keyword, but really going after a keyword intent, then asking yourself, how can I quantify the demand for an intent instead of just the keyword itself?
Yeah, I mean, you can't control the buyer journey, but you can be there throughout. And that goes for whether you're selling socks or $250,000, B2B software. I love the way that you said that. And Google Trends is a great example. I always like to recommend the rising and top queries section of Google Trends. And also Google Trends interacts with the Google Knowledge Graph API. So you can get topics right in the bottom right of your Google Trends, and that connects right to Google's Knowledge Graph API. If you're not familiar with that, I mean, that's a taxonomy that y'all should know about, and you can also look that up in Wikidata. So I love that recommendation, Kevin. So generally though, with user intent, how are topics and how does focusing on intent change a general strategy or a really, really tuned strategy? I always like to say, sort descend on Google AdWords Keyword Planner is not a keyword strategy, right? But it is a lot of people's keyword strategy. So how does it really change your day-to-day?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I want to take a step back to roughly 2016. I think that's when I noticed a big change in the SEO world. And that's also when Google started to incorporate more machine learning into their algorithms, especially RankBrain, which I think is very central to user intent. And so what happened in 2016 is that I realized that pages are able to rank for thousands of keywords. And there was very different than the methodology or the principles that I grew up with in SEO, which were that you basically have a page per keyword, right? Maybe it would rank for 2 or 3 keywords, very close variations of the keyword. But starting 2016, I realized, oh man, like a single page can rank for thousands of keywords, literally, and you still have that today, right? And so at the time, the tone was more around topics, and we thought that, okay, what Google does is they group keywords into topics, and so any page that covers a topic holistically or completely would then rank for all these keywords. And so over time, or better said, I changed my mind. And now I think that what I confused with topics is actually user intent. And so Google, when it finds a page that really hits the head on a user intent, it allows that page to rank for thousands of keywords. A good example is, for example, in the travel space, right? So say you plan a trip and you go to San Francisco, and then you want to figure out what to do. You want to put together your itinerary. You Google things like what to do in San Francisco. And the top pages that you typically find there, they rank for all sorts of related keywords to that user intent. So my intent in that situation is to find out what to do in San Francisco, but there are many ways to express that, right? So going back to the keyword level, you could attach a keyword like what to do in San Francisco, or things to do in San Francisco, or top things to do in San Francisco. And these all reflect the same user intent. They all want to or should help users to put together the itinerary, right? I think that's one of the good examples that I can that I remember from back in the time. And so again, what I confused with topics is actually user intent. And the whole idea is to say, okay, single pages can satisfy one intent, maybe two or three, right? There are similar intents that overlap to a certain degree. And if that works really well, that page can rank for thousands of keywords, which brings us back to the first topics that we talked about, right? We talked about search volume. And so the fallacy to fall into is to say, okay, this page targets one main keyword, and that's the search volume. So that's the traffic potential of that page. And that is a huge trap to fall into, because that's not true, right? What you have to do in theory is to aggregate all the keywords that relate to a search intent, and then combine the search volume for that, and then say that's our traffic potential.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and then looking at which queries in this pool of words have multiple different potential intents, so where they're fractured. So some people who are searching for CRM software want to know, what is it? Some people are like in the middle of the buying process, and some people are, doing something else, right? They might, be thinking of a different acronym, which is not even intent fracture, but it's more meaning, a different meaning, or meaning disambiguation or ambiguity. So I love that example. And, I think that rounding that out is, if I'm looking to build authority on a particular intent or an intent topic collection, how do you get started? And how do you, I know analyzing what you have already is important, but also looking at the search results, right?
Yes, absolutely. Search results are interesting because they're almost something like a fulfilling prophecy. And we have to be careful with that. But theoretically, by looking at the results, you get an idea of what Google expects in the top results of. And that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, you mentioned fractured intent. So to quickly double down on that, fractured intent happens when a keyword is ambiguous, which means that it can have several meanings at the same time, or better said, that it can have several intents at the same time. So you came up with a really good example of CRM software, which was really important when I was at G2, really important topic and keyword for us. And as you mentioned correctly, some people, when they Google CRM software, they want to learn what it is. They want to see different CRM solutions. They want to learn more about how to use a CRM software. These are three different intents. And Google, and by the way, this is outlined in their Google Quality Radar guidelines. So this is not theorizing. This is an actual practical applied concept. Google is aware that keywords, especially the shorter they are, have a degree of ambiguity. And so it doesn't make sense to just assign one intent to a query. There are different types of intents. And Google distinguishes between the dominant, common, and minor intent, right? So Google does know that when people look CRM software, the majority of them probably want to see different software solutions, right? And then commonly people also want to know what CRM software is. And then a minor fraction of that group of people who look for that for the keyword, they want to understand how to use CRM software, right? And this is how it splits up. Now, what does that tell us what does that say about the search results? First of all, by looking at the results, we can get an accurate, or we can get a relatively accurate idea of what Google expects, but we have to take that SERP mix into account. We have to take into account that Google reserves a number of slots for different types of sites that fulfill different parts of this fragmented intent, right? So 4 slots, for example, would go to sites that list different software solutions for CRM software. 3 slots would go to sites that explain what CRM software is, and then maybe 3 slots are reserved to sites that explain how to use CRM software. That's what I mean with the SERP mix, right? The second interesting thing is that by looking at the SERP features that Google shows, SERP features like video carousels, featured snippets, FAQ, knowledge graphs, local maps, all these, like there are many different SERP features. By looking at what SERP features Google shows, we can get an idea of how Google identifies the different intents, right? So if you have a shopping ad, or if you have ads on that search results page, for example, that is a hint that Google sees at least part of the user intent as transactional, meaning people want to buy something behind that. And so I think it goes back to saying, okay, first of all, there are many different intents, right? Like I think one mistake that we often make is to say there's just informational, transactional, navigational. There are probably hundreds of different user intents, right? There's more granularity behind that. Also, the shorter query is the more ambiguous, and so the more varied the SERP mix that Google shows. But then third, by getting by building systems that allow us to reverse engineer what Google displays on the SERP, we can get a very refined understanding of user intent. So I'll stop there because there's a lot more depth to go into, but I think that's how I would summarize it.
I think I'm going to play back that video just to describe why we have fracture and SERP features on every topic in MarketMuse. I mean, it's basically just like describing the reasons why we do what we do. In a really perfect way. So if I'm building authority on that, should I be covering in my content, should I be covering the entire buy cycle, all the relevant user intents? Should I go past purchase into, post purchase, someone who's already bought my software, someone who's already bought my, wallet and what they would care about? Do I have to cover everything? Because the thing that's near and dear to my heart is when you said one page, one topic, one page, one word is dead. It is, and it's been dead for a long time. It amazes me that that's not the norm. But do I need to do that for every topic? And what are the other things I should be thinking about when I'm building content with user intent in mind?
Absolutely. The way to bring structure and order into that chaos and into that noise is to, as you said correctly, look back at the buyer journey or user journey. What are the different? Basically, the user journey is basically, to me, everything that happens from the point that a user becomes aware of a problem to solving that problem. And sometimes that user journey is a single step. They just want to see what the weather is out there. So they Google weather, and Google knows they're in Chicago and then tells them, oh, it's raining outside. In other cases, that user journey can take 30, 40, 50, 100 steps. In fact, there is this really cool market research blog out there from Google called Think with Google, and there are a couple of articles where they explain where they did some user research, and they show that by like a very simple thing of like planning a trip might involve 100 different steps, 100 different searches, right? So it varies from vertical to vertical and from the product and the market, right? So first of all, you want to get an understanding, and I think most marketers and founders know this intuitively. Are we talking about a super long buyer journey or buyer cycle? Are we talking about a short buyer cycle? And then second, a framework that I like to use to structure that is this jobs to be done framework by Clayton Christensen. Clayton Christensen was a very famous Harvard University professor of economics. And he coined a couple of terms, for example, the term of disruption in startups. And he also came up with this jobs to be done framework, which basically simplifies, because the core or the problem that I have with buyer journeys and user journeys is that they're not the same for all of your audiences, right? And this idea of a persona, I'm not the biggest fan of personas anymore, to be honest. And I recently had a couple of interesting Twitter exchanges about that. But basically, based on your product, you just target many different demographics, psychographics, right? It's hard to just say, hey, this is my perfect persona, and so I align my whole marketing strategy or whole SEO strategy on that persona. In many cases, people just have a job that they want to get done, right? Like, I want to go to San Francisco, I want to book a flight. It doesn't matter if I'm 25 or if I'm 68. Maybe it matters when I select my seat, right? Maybe I have a bit more spending power, but at the core, it's the same job that I'm trying to get done. And so jobs to be done is a very simple but elegant framework that basically helps you list all the different jobs that your searchers are trying to get done. You can feed that with market research. You can feed that with search or keyword research, I mean. And then from there, you can see, okay, what are the different intents that people have? I want to book a flight. I want to find the cheapest flight. I want to find the earliest flight. These are all different things. And then from there, you can go into thinking, okay, what kind of content do I need to create? How can I tackle that? So this is basically how I think, how I try to like structure all of this keyword research, intent. And so this is what worked for me so far.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a skill that needs to be developed. It's that where if you're looking at a list of keywords, a list of keyword variants, you want to build a narrative. The person who's looking for this variant desires to do these jobs and to accomplish these tasks. Now, I want to build. I love the travel example. We actually used that in a workshop yesterday. Ours was things to do in Quebec City. And the observation was, if you don't write the article about that museum, someone else will. And when someone's looking up that things to do in Quebec City, they may want to go to the museum, right? And if you don't put it there, you're not the person that's going to be the one that informs them on that activity or that thing they care about. Apply that to your business. But I also like to ask a sales team, right, if that's relevant, or your CEO, and say, do we want people from this industry to buy, right? So why don't we have industry specific content that speaks to them, right? It's not just about the persona. It's not just about software buyer Steve, who's 41 and has been in the space for 10 years. But I love the way you said that. Personas are tough. Personas are tough. So if someone is trying to make the case for focusing on this, but maybe they're in a siloed organization where demand gen writes this content marketing writes that content, editorial is over here. What do you tell them about how to, unify and hold hands through the journey?
Yeah. By the way, I really like how you express that with a narrative, right? Like, it's so funny because we write narratives for product development all the time. As a user, I want to do X so I can do Y, right? Like, this is like the basics of product development, but we somehow ignore it in marketing, and I don't know why, but it would be really helpful. And so, when it comes to organizations and siloing, I mean, first of all, it sounds a bit like an organizational problem. So, like, I think there is more involved than just the sheer marketing thing. However, I think there's an opportunity to excite other parts of the company around a common narrative, as you said. Like, not just on a user level or a jobs to be done level, but on a vision level, right? Like, what's the opportunity here? What could this look like if this was working really well? And those silos are very dangerous, right? And it's not uncommon for companies to fall into silos. But at the same time, I've never seen somebody coming up with a super exciting narrative fed with data and rationale, right? It has to make sense. It cannot just be a fairy tale. And then not getting support from other departments as well. Because reality is that I think this is very foundational, right? I think the idea of jobs to be done, user journeys, this is cross-departmental. It doesn't just apply to content marketing and content, as you said, right? I think that advertising departments can benefit a lot from that, or demand gen, or whatever have you. And so treating that in a silo is very dangerous, and also means that you drive with your handbrake pulled. And on the other hand, when you see very aligned groups or marketing groups and marketing teams that work together, you often find that you're much more efficient. You get much more out of it. And these things like identifying user intent, defining buyer journeys, they're useful for everyone, and that creates synergies. And it means you come to a place where 1 + 1 = 3, and you help each other, and everything works out. So there's no I think like solving organizational silos is a deep topic that takes a lot of time to discuss, right? It's a solvable topic. But I think having a concise narrative, having a concise plan and vision, I think those are remedies against these silos that go across borders.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier when you're doing that with user intents and topics than it is with lists of keywords. Because, if you're tossing spreadsheets around, a lot of people can't rally around a spreadsheet. So thank you so much, Kevin. This has been an amazing discussion. I think it really brings a lot of thoughtful topics in place. Where can people find you next? And tell us a little bit. I know you have a big conference next week.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. We have Unite coming up, Shopify Unite. That's our big conference happening on Tuesday, specifically for our developers and partners. And so that's where we announce some really cool new features, new things in development, and I think we have a nice roster of announcements this year. So I'm very excited about that. When it comes to myself, I write a weekly email called Growth Memo and have a podcast called TechBound. So if you're curious about that, just go to kevin-indig.com or Google my name. You should find all that stuff on Google if I do my job well.
Awesome. And I'll brag on you a little bit. You have one of the best posts on internal linking ever written. Go check it out, Kevin Indig, internal linking. And thanks again for everybody for joining us. And we'll see y'all soon.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure.